History rarely records its endings as loudly as its beginnings. In 1908, a 2-year-old boy named Aisin-Gioro Puyi inherited the largest population ever ruled by a child. He became emperor before he could form memory, then spent a lifetime learning what it meant to lose power step by step, from throne to exile, to puppet, to prisoner, to gardener. This is not a tale of glory, but of gradual reduction, a dynasty shrinking into one ordinary life. Stay with this story, watch closely, and subscribe if you want more forgotten histories told with precision and truth. In December of 1908, attendants carried a 2-year-old boy across the inner court of the Forbidden City, his weight insignificant compared to the authority being placed upon him. His name was Aisin-Gioro Puyi. He did not walk to his throne. He was positioned, adjusted, and displayed. The yellow robe assigned to emperors of the Qing pooled around his feet in a heavy ring of fabric, more cloth than child. Witnesses recorded that he cried when the crown was lowered toward him, an instinctive reaction more appropriate for infancy than sovereignty. Court officials responded not with comfort, but with ceremonial patience. Their bows were synchronized, precise, and silent. The setting followed protocol that had existed for centuries. Eunuchs lined the hall in 2 narrow columns, their eyes lowered. The regent, Prince Chun, stood behind the boy, directing the ritual, although the imperial edicts would soon bear Puyi's name. No explanation was offered to the child, who understood neither language of state nor the ceremony's intent. He was 2 years old, recently weaned from a nurse's care, yet attendants addressed him as Son of Heaven. Any misstep, crying, turning away, fidgeting, was corrected by rearrangement rather than instruction. In the days after the accession, his world contracted. The palace was large, but movement was restricted to designated halls and courtyards. Toys, if present, were replaced with ritual objects, seals, scrolls, and miniature versions of ceremonial items scaled down for a child too small to lift the originals. Eunuchs followed him at all hours, recording preferences, feeding habits, and cries. When he pointed or whimpered, adults responded as if a command had been issued. He learned quickly that sounds produced obedience, yet the obedience had no intuitive meaning. No decision he made altered government or policy. He could compel a servant to pour tea, but could not comprehend the thousands of edicts issued in his name. Lessons began immediately. Tutors instructed him in posture back straight, chin neutral, gaze forward. They corrected his stance by repositioning limbs rather than asking for voluntary compliance. Officials reported that he showed distress when separated from his wet nurse, yet separation was required. A ruler could not be comforted as a son. Servants taught him instead to tolerate distance. Court protocol dictated that meals be served in silence. He ate under supervision, not with family. He slept surrounded by guards and eunuchs, but without companionship. The imperial residence was designed to protect and isolate simultaneously, a structure meant for an adult sovereign, not a toddler. His only interactions were formal: bows, recitations, dressing, relocation. The crown weighed more in expectation than metal. Outside the palace, China was unstable. Newspapers circulated rapidly, criticizing the Qing Dynasty's inability to modernize. Rebellions stirred in southern provinces. None of this was explained to the child, who had not yet formed full sentences. Inside the Forbidden City, reports reached the regent and senior ministers, but corridors carrying information were long and filtered. Puyi remained unaware, even as officials debated policies that invoked his title. The chapter closes in late evening. Candles burn low across the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Eunuchs withdraw, leaving the nurse to settle the child emperor into sleep. Beyond the red walls, faint disturbances echo distant shouting, movement, a city changing without his knowledge. It is the first recorded hint that the world he nominally ruled was shifting without waiting for him. By the 3rd year of his reign, Puyi could hold a brush steadily enough to mark paper, though the symbols meant nothing to him. His father, Prince Chun ruled in his name, receiving memorials from ministers while the child emperor was confined to lessons in etiquette and deportment. He sat on a raised seat while tutors demonstrated how to bow minimally in acknowledgement, how to speak slowly, how to show neither excitement nor fear. Emotional expression was corrected by repositioning his hands or straightening his back. Eunuchs recorded his progress as if documenting the behavior of a subject, not raising a child. He was separated from most family contact. His mother appeared only on formal occasions and never alone. Meals were delivered with precision, and conversation during them was discouraged. The Forbidden City offered space, but not freedom. Corridors seemed endless yet inaccessible. He passed rows of palace doors he was told never to open, entrances that led to rooms he would never enter. Since he had ascended too young to form memories of life outside the walls, palace protocol became his reality. Ink practice took place each morning. The brush trembled slightly when he copied characters, ink spreading unevenly across rice paper. A tutor adjusted his fingers wordlessly and moved aside. The lesson repeated daily until he could reproduce the required strokes. Books on history were placed before him, but content mattered less than discipline. The objective was stillness, not understanding. While he traced lines of text, ministers beyond the study hall argued over finances, foreign pressure, and political decay. None of this reached him directly. He knew only that adults came and went with urgency. Reports of unrest began to circulate inside the court. He heard fragments when servants forgot their caution. Provinces in the south refused to comply with orders. Reformists distributed printed materials criticizing the dynasty. Newspapers, once limited in print, became more common, carried through city gates by students and traders. Yet no version of this reality was offered to him. He signed edicts by placing his seal where indicated, unaware of implications or resistance they might provoke. His authority existed only in scripts others prepared. At formal audiences, officials bowed before him, touching foreheads to the floor. The silence that followed was absolute. Instructions were delivered through the regent. Puyi's presence served as a symbol rather than a decision-making force. He began to observe that commands issued in his name were reactions to crises he never witnessed. The empire he was believed to command functioned without his involvement, a structure maintained by men older and more experienced. He could order a servant to close a window, but not a general to mobilize troops. One afternoon, while practicing calligraphy, a secretary entered carrying a scroll sealed in red. He stood at a respectful distance and waited for approval from the regent, not the emperor. When permission was granted, he read aloud a report describing provincial uprisings, the language sparse, factual, and concerning. Puyi continued tracing characters, yet his hand paused slightly. The brush hovered above paper, ink gathering into a dark bead about to fall. The report ended, but discussion had only begun. Voices outside the study shifted in tone, lower and urgent. Decisions would be made, strategies formed, decrees drafted, none by the child seated inside. He returned to his writing, unaware of how near the rebellion was, but aware, for the first time, that authority did not live in him. The palace doors remained shut, and the world beyond them moved closer. In February of 1912, attendants placed a document before the 6-year-old emperor and guided his hand toward the space where the imperial seal would rest. Puyi recognized the seal, but not the meaning of the text beneath it. Officials stood in rows, their expressions restrained but tense. Some wept quietly, careful not to disturb protocol. The boy did not cry. He watched as adults negotiated a transition he could not comprehend. The abdication ended the Qing Dynasty, yet his daily routine remained unchanged. The room chosen for the signing was arranged according to ceremonial procedure. Ministers faced the throne with lowered eyes. A eunuch stepped forward with the red seal, pressing it into silk-backed paper. The sound was soft, final. The monarchy that had ruled China for centuries was dissolved with a gesture that took seconds. Puyi, seated on an ornate yellow cushion, shifted his weight and looked toward the windows, unaware that the action marked the end of imperial authority. No explanation followed. The regent announced completion, and attendants withdrew. The new republic recognized his symbolic status, but removed power entirely. Negotiators arranged terms allowing him to remain inside the Forbidden City, retaining imperial titles only for internal use. His environment continued to mirror past grandeur: gold-lined chambers, lacquered floors, carved screens dividing light, but authority was absent. Orders signed in his name no longer reached provinces. He was an emperor without an empire, a child whose title held ceremonial relevance only to those within the palace walls. The following days unfolded with quiet adjustments. Court officials ceased attending morning meetings. Rituals shortened. Corruption investigations began as new leadership assumed control. Eunuchs who once managed provincial correspondence now tended to domestic maintenance. The throne room, once filled with movement and negotiation, became a space of display rather than governance. Puyi walked across it one morning, noticing the absence of ministers. A large hall built for announcements echoed faintly with each step. Outside the palace, crowds celebrated the Republic. Student groups carried flags through Beijing streets. Newspapers printed accounts of reform, modernization, and national awakening. Firecrackers sounded in distant neighborhoods. No such celebration entered the Forbidden City. Servants maintained silence out of habit, continuing to bow to him and address him by imperial titles. The contrast between internal reverence and external dismissal created a separation he could not yet articulate. In private quarters, tutors still presented history lessons. They spoke of ancient battles, dynastic foundations, and Confucian order, without referencing the revolution currently rewriting his own position. Meals were served according to imperial schedule, though the atmosphere changed. Fewer officials attended banquets. Ceremonial dishes were replaced by simpler servings prepared quickly. The hierarchy of the court compressed as relevance diminished. One evening, Puyi approached the throne room again. Lamps burned at measured intervals, their light dim and uniform. No minister stood waiting. No reports awaited signature. The hall stretched empty, a chamber built for authority now functioning as a monument to what no longer existed. The yellow cushion remained centered beneath the canopy, untouched since the abdication. He paused before sitting, as though uncertain of procedure. Beyond the palace walls, Beijing moved into a new era. Inside, silence deepened. Eunuchs performed their duties mechanically, kneeling before a throne that no longer represented national power. Puyi remained seated, listening for footsteps that never came. The vast room held stillness that felt deliberate rather than accidental, a moment suspended without resolution. The chapter closes here, a child emperor in a hall without kingdom, waiting in the quiet that follows collapse. After the abdication, Puyi continued to wake beneath silk canopies, attended by eunuchs who bowed as they dressed him each morning. His chambers remained furnished with carved screens, embroidered cushions, and lacquered chests, but the sense of authority had drained from the space. He moved through the palace like an artifact preserved in its original setting. Servants followed protocol as though nothing had changed, repeating rituals that had once supported imperial governance, but now sustained only habit. The Forbidden City functioned as residence, museum, and containment. His movement was restricted to internal courtyards and galleries. Guards ensured no exit beyond the gates. The palace was vast, but boundaries rendered it small. Eunuchs prepared lessons in calligraphy, history, and formal address. He learned correct posture and tone for issuing orders few would ever hear. If he questioned why, answers were vague and respectful. He remained emperor in title within walls that no longer acknowledged sovereignty. One of his few amusements came in the form of a bicycle. He rode it in tight circles across a courtyard paved with worn stone, wheels tracing the same paths each day. Attendants watched closely, ready to intervene if he fell. The bicycle represented mobility but not freedom. Its permitted range had been mapped by others. When he attempted to cross into adjoining courtyards, guards signaled him back. The ride continued, unvaried, like a sealed loop. Western magazines began circulating discreetly among tutors and higher-ranking eunuchs. Puyi viewed them with interest. Photographs displayed steam locomotives, crowded streets, universities, and factories, images of a world progressing beyond the palace walls. He examined pages carefully, noting clothing entirely unlike the robes hung in his chamber. Stacks of ceremonial garments remained untouched, folded precisely according to court tradition. Their presence signified continuity, yet their disuse revealed the absence of purpose. He questioned attendants about the outside world, but answers remained limited. Discussions of political reform and industrial development occurred outside his hearing. When he pressed further, tutors redirected lessons toward classical texts. He sensed disparity between the life demonstrated by foreign images and the one confined within the palace. Servants maintained ancient rituals, bowing, speaking in measured tones, avoiding direct eye contact unless invited. Their obedience reinforced an identity he no longer recognized as secure. The palace grounds echoed differently now. Fewer officials visited. Corridors once busy with administrative movement remained quiet. Even festival ceremonies diminished. Eunuchs prepared elaborate meals and positioned them in accordance with imperial dining order, yet silence persisted. Puyi's frustration grew in increments. He threw objects occasionally, though attendants removed them quickly and resumed calm service. His reactions failed to alter conditions. He continued cycling through the courtyard, aware that the red walls surrounding him were less protection than containment. Beyond them, Beijing changed year by year. Magazines displayed inventions he might never see. His identity as emperor had become a role performed within restricted territory, monitored and preserved rather than enacted. He recognized the stagnation without articulating its weight. Late one afternoon, distant sounds reached the palace. Gunfire, irregular but distinct. Attendants paused, exchanged short glances, then resumed duties without explanation. War between factions in the city threatened stability, yet the gates remained sealed. Puyi stood at the edge of the courtyard, bicycle beside him, listening. The noise arrived from beyond walls he could not cross, suggesting movement and danger while he remained fixed in place. Whatever was happening outside approached, but the palace's rituals did not shift. The chapter ends with him waiting, confined in luxury, listening to conflict he cannot see. In 1924, soldiers from the Republic entered the Forbidden City under official decree. Their presence was direct and unceremonial, uniforms replacing court robes, weapons visible where eunuchs once carried scrolls. They informed palace attendants that imperial privileges were terminated effective immediately. Puyi, then 18, received notice without ceremony. His time within the red walls had preserved rituals, but not power. Now removal was administrative, recorded in reports, not announced through drums or proclamation. Inventory began at sunrise. Treasuries were opened, artifacts catalogued, furniture tagged. Objects not permitted for retention were marked for state acquisition. Servants voiced objections quietly and were cautioned against protest. Puyi observed the process from a raised platform, not as ruler but as occupant. Items once signifying authority became property of the Republic. Scribes noted each transfer, reducing imperial history to lists and classifications. He was instructed to prepare for departure. Personal clothing was folded, limited to what he could take. Ceremonial garments remained behind, lined in yellow and red, unused for years but symbolically immovable. As attendants packed plain robes into chests, Puyi walked the length of his chambers. Rooms that once defined his world felt smaller, stripped of function. He touched carved window frames, objects he had overlooked until forced to leave them. Troops guided him toward the Meridian Gate, He rode in a sedan chair at first, then stepped down, walking the final distance. The red lacquer gates towered ahead, familiar yet unreachable from the outside. Guards opened them with steady movements, hinges loud in a space long accustomed to silence. The threshold held significance. Beyond it, he would no longer be emperor, only former occupant of a system dissolved by revolution. Outside, Beijing operated without reference to him. Street vendors called to customers, selling food and cloth. Carts rattled across uneven stone. The pace of the city was uncoordinated and unconcerned with imperial rhythm. Passers-by glanced at the procession but did not bow. Some watched openly, recognizing his status and appearance, but not acknowledging it ceremonially. Their indifference communicated change more clearly than official decree. Puyi stepped onto the street, the ground uneven beneath cloth shoes worn across polished palace floors. Smells unfamiliar to him, smoke, food, animals, displaced the incense of the forbidden city. Traffic moved unpredictably. Children ran between stalls. The structure of the world he knew dissolved into movement uncontrolled by ritual. He hesitated, uncertain of direction. Republic soldiers escorted him to a designated residence outside the palace. The property was spacious yet ordinary, lacking the architecture of imperial authority. Servants unpacked quietly, unsure of new expectations. Puyi stood near the gate, adjusting to surroundings that did not enforce hierarchy. No eunuchs monitored his steps. No tutors dictated posture. The absence of restriction revealed the absence of purpose. When arrangements concluded, the escort dismissed itself. Puyi walked a short distance away and turned back. From the street, the forbidden city appeared distant, its walls uniform and impenetrable. Red lacquer gates that had framed his life were closing, sealed by guards who followed orders not from him, but from a government built on his empire as remains. The sound was final, metal and wood meeting with deliberate force. He stood watching until movement ceased. No one bowed. No titles were spoken. He remained on the outside, status changed in an instant. Behind him lay a city indifferent to former rulers. Ahead was directionless space. The chapter ends with him looking back, realizing the gates will not open again. After expulsion from the Forbidden City, Puyi occupied a series of residences allocated by the Republic. They were comfortable, furnished adequately, and staffed by attendants who addressed him formally out of habit rather than obligation. Monitors from the government visited regularly under the guise of protection, though their presence felt more like surveillance. Reports of his activities were forwarded to authorities, documenting each visitor, lesson, and expenditure. Freedom existed in form but was regulated in practice. He tried to adapt to civilian life. English tutors arrived daily, instructing him in grammar, pronunciation, and reading. Lessons took place in a study lit by a single lamp, the light concentrated on handwriting exercises and phonetic repetition. Puyi practiced lines aloud, structured sentences, unfamiliar sounds. His voice, once used for ritual command, now rehearsed conversational phrases. A Western-style suit was tailored for him, fitted carefully over shoulders accustomed to heavy imperial robes. The transformation was visual but not internal. He expressed interest in studying abroad, particularly at Oxford. This request was noted but not approved. Officials hesitated to allow travel that might connect him with foreign influence or monarchist supporters. Applications stalled. Paperwork delayed. No refusal was issued, but neither was permission. His ambition remained theoretical. Instead, magazines and books became his reference to a world he could not enter. He read about universities, scientific progress, and modern governance. Each article emphasized advancement beyond the system that once defined him. During this period, marriage discussions progressed. The arrangement aimed to preserve royal dignity, though political relevance had already faded. Names were considered, families contacted, rituals planned. He participated in decisions as tradition required, yet the process emphasized status without power. The ceremony, when conducted, followed aristocratic custom, complete with embroidered garments and formal greetings. Guests attended out of respect for history rather than hope for influence. Puyi fulfilled expectations, but the event did not alter his position. It marked continuity of lineage, not restoration of authority. Attempts to live as an educated citizen exposed contradictions. While he practiced modern habits, the structure of his life retained imperial residue. Servants continued to bow. Meals followed ordered placement. His posture remained straight, trained for display. When he walked in public settings, people recognized him and reacted with curiosity rather than deference. Some acknowledged him quietly. Others observed without approach. He occupied a space between reverence and irrelevance. Government oversight intensified when political tensions increased nationally. Visitors were screened. Correspondence was reviewed. Any sign of monarchist sentiment triggered inquiry. His life became a monitored experiment in civilian adaptation. He was neither prisoner nor free individual. Without the palace, identity lacked anchor. The titles persisted but function did not. He occupied space but lacked role. One evening, diplomats from Japan requested an audience. Their presentation was formal. They spoke of opportunity, stability, and leadership. They suggested restoration, a throne in Manchuria under Japanese support. The language implied return of status and purpose. Puyi listened without visible reaction, hands folded, posture precise. Details remained vague, but intention was clear. He retired to his study afterward, the lamp still burning, English notes open beside unused ink. The Western suit hung near the door, structured, unused that evening. His future appeared divided between continued irrelevance or acceptance of foreign-backed authority. The chapter ends here, with an offer unresolved, a throne presented as rescue, but not yet accepted. In March 1934, Puyi entered the Hall of State in Manchukuo, wearing ceremonial robes modeled after imperial attire overturned 2 decades earlier. Japan declared him emperor of the new state, reviving rituals of sovereignty that no longer belonged to him. Foreign officers stood on either side of the throne, positioned closer than his Chinese ministers. Their uniforms contrasted sharply with the traditional iconography behind him, a visible indication of authority redirected. When he raised his gaze to the assembled audience, he saw recognition, but not submission. The crowd responded to staging more than allegiance. During early sessions of governance, advisors introduced policy drafts prepared in Japanese. Translators followed, but decisions were made before interpretation. Puyi affixed his seal where instructed, the process efficient and rehearsed. Even his daily schedule was determined externally. He attended parades, reviewed troops, and delivered scripted speeches emphasizing unity and progress. Recordings captured his voice, but content originated elsewhere. The title of emperor returned to his name, yet direction came from individuals operating behind protocol. Propaganda amplified the illusion of control. Publications depicted him as divine ruler, restoring stability to Manchuria under enlightened guidance. Photographs presented him seated on a throne surrounded by officers, the arrangement symmetrical and deliberate. Citizens in attendance were told to bow and cheer in predetermined sequence. Theatrical reverence replaced spontaneous support. The state relied on imagery more than mandate. As months progressed, wartime objectives expanded. Factories produced supplies for Japan's military operations. Men were conscripted. Farmers surrendered grain under quota. Reports arrived detailing resistance, followed by orders for suppression. Puyi read casualty summaries, though explanations softened severity. When documents requiring approval were placed before him, he recognized signatures that led to enforcement. He continued sealing them, aware that his action legitimized decisions already determined. Private audiences with advisors revealed more direct control. Officers presented objectives with minimal negotiation. Suggestions for independent policy received polite refusal. When Puyi asked to visit certain regions, permission was deferred. Travel required escort and authorization. His presence served symbolic purpose, a figurehead cementing occupation. Authority was present in appearance only. At formal meetings, he monitored interactions. Ministers addressed military representatives before speaking to him. Questions directed his way were formulaic, seeking validation rather than input. He sat upon a throne elevated above the room, yet influence operated below. The distance between position and power widened. He became increasingly conscious of a role without agency. Over time, he noted consequences. Villages relocated under development orders. Police detained dissenting citizens. Foreign press coverage criticized the regime, citing exploitation and forced labor. These accounts reached him indirectly, filtered through administrative summaries. Still, fragments conveyed impact beyond ceremony. He signed another series of orders, the paper smooth beneath his palm, foreign eyes watching as his seal pressed into the page. During an inspection, he observed factories producing ammunition. Workers moved quickly, heads lowered. The environment was loud, mechanical, organized for output. He remained on a raised platform, flanked by officers. No one requested his instruction. The visit concluded with a photograph taken for distribution. That evening, he sat alone, robe folded on a chair, documents spread across a table. Each page bore his seal. Each affected lives he did not govern. The realization formed gradually and without dramatization. The title restored power in name, but removed autonomy further than exile ever had. Influence flowed around him, not through him. As war intensified, he sensed risk tied to his position. Decisions attributed to him created responsibility he had not chosen. The chapter ends with him recognizing that authority used by others carries consequence that may return to the signature that endorsed it. By August 1945, the infrastructure supporting Puyi's reign in Manchukuo began to collapse. Japanese command withdrew forces to defend core territories, leaving Manchuria exposed. Reports of Soviet advancement arrived daily, concise and factual, each reducing the territory under control. Military advisors assured him of strategy and reinforcement, yet maps on the table grew empty. Red arrows representing Soviet movement extended across the region with speed unmatched by retreating troops. Inside the palace at Changchun, preparations shifted from governance to evacuation. Officials burned archives and courtyard braziers, papers curling black and drifting upward in fragments. Documents once signed with Puyi's seal disintegrated in open air. The ash scattered across stone walkways, erasing administrative record as rapidly as authority dissolved. Servants packed belongings into crates without clear instruction. Rooms emptied quickly, though ceremony continued mechanically until interrupted by urgency. Puyi was instructed to prepare for departure. A civilian suit replaced imperial robes. A hat concealed his identity in case of capture. Advisors spoke plainly, emphasizing the necessity of relocation. No speech referenced honor or sovereignty. Survival was the objective. He carried a suitcase partly filled, zipper left incomplete, as instructions interrupted final closure. The bag remained open on the table, clothing visible, symbolic of decisions made without resolution. Transport to the airfield was arranged through a small convoy. The vehicle moved through streets marked by disorder, civilians fleeing, shops shuttered, soldiers directing limited traffic. He observed through the window without speaking. The city he once governed through symbolic authority appeared unfamiliar, its structure dismantled rapidly. No one bowed. Few looked directly at him. The environment did not acknowledge hierarchy. At the runway, a plane waited with engines prepared, but not yet active. Officers hurried him toward the aircraft, urging haste. The horizon carried distant sound of artillery, low and persistent. Soviet forces were close enough to alter the sky with smoke. Boarding procedures began, but communication disrupted. A separate vehicle arrived unexpectedly. Uniformed men exited, their insignia unfamiliar to palace guards. Soviet soldiers advanced without hesitation. Their weapons remained controlled, their movements coordinated. Japanese personnel attempted resistance, but lacked numbers. Puyi was escorted away from the aircraft. The plan dissolved within minutes. Identification was confirmed. No negotiation followed. He was placed into custody as a detainee rather than a diplomatic figure. His second reign ended without declaration or ceremony. The convoy redirected toward holding facilities. Puyi's suitcase remained on the airfield runway, the zipper open, clothing exposed to wind that carried charred fragments of palace documents. Possessions, status, and intention were left behind. The transition occurred with administrative efficiency, no formal dismissal. Soldiers addressed him respectfully, but not deferentially. Commands came through translators. His role shifted from sovereign to captive through procedural action. Inside a metal transport truck, he sat on a bench opposite armed guards. The interior was unadorned, the air metallic and warm. The sound of the door closing behind him was final, thick, and mechanical. No servants accompanied him. No attendants recorded movements or offered guidance. Authority reduced to presence only, without title or function. The vehicle moved forward, leaving the airfield behind. Outside, the war continued. Inside, the former emperor occupied space equal to others. The chapter ends here, with the truck door locked, the cabin sealed, and Puyi transported as cargo, not command. After capture, Puyi was transported to Siberia under military supervision. The environment differed entirely from palaces and ministries. Barracks instead of chambers, guards instead of eunuchs, meals delivered without ceremony. Snow accumulated against wooden walls. Wind entered through gaps, and routine replaced privilege with uniformity. No titles were used. His name was recorded alongside other detainees, catalogued, not proclaimed. Winter cold reduced each day to survival, body and schedule. Labor was assigned early. He swept courtyards with stiff brushes, ice forming at the edges of cleared ground. Laundry tasks followed, washing clothes in metal basins, steam rising into air that froze breath immediately. The physical discomfort was steady, unembellished, and demanded endurance rather than authority. He learned work through repetition, not instruction. The ground he cleared belonged to no ceremonial hall. It was maintenance, not ritual. Interrogations occurred without extravagance. Officials questioned him about Manchukuo, decisions made under instruction, and knowledge of Japanese operations. Records were kept in plain folders. Answers were measured, cross-referenced, and reviewed. He spoke with pauses, uncertain of consequences for incomplete memory. There was no throne to reinforce his statements, no seal to legitimize them. Words existed independently, weighed for accuracy rather than hierarchy. After years in Siberia, transfer orders arrived. He returned to China, not as sovereign but as prisoner. Communist authorities initiated reeducation, a program designed to dismantle old identity and rebuild ideological adherence. He lived in a cell shared with others. Daily tasks included cleaning floors, working gardens, and attending lectures on revolutionary history. Guards monitored progression. Compliance was expected, not requested. Confession writing became central. Pages accumulated with statements recounting his role in Manchukuo, decisions signed under influence, and awareness of consequences. His signature trembled at the bottom of each sheet, ink uneven where his hand hesitated. He documented actions without decoration, as instructed. Each confession served as both record and obligation, acknowledgement of responsibility in exchange for possible reform. Separation from imperial memory intensified. No attendants dressed him. No meals arrived in sequence of rank. Clothing was plain, identical to others. Discussions centered on labor quotas, not ceremony. He learned to respond to his name when spoken without honorifics. The environment did not allow for superiority, only function. Gradually, obedience replaced protocol. He followed orders quickly, not because ritual required it, but because refusal held consequence. Reflection came not through contemplation, but through repetition. Sweeping the same path daily, washing garments of men equal to him, writing the same admission across pages, each action stripped remainder of imperial identity. He recognized that the empire formed him as figurehead and shield, removing personal agency until collapse forced exposure. He had been ruler and instrument simultaneously, occupying a role that prevented development beyond title. Years passed under this structure. Progress evaluations documented behavior and ideological alignment. One day, during routine assembly, an officer announced that Puyi's case was under review. Possibility of pardon depended on continued compliance and demonstration of rehabilitation. The words were factual, without promise. Freedom became potential, not entitlement. He returned to labor without visible reaction, broom in hand, steam lifting from wet clothing nearby. His place remained within walls, but direction shifted minutely, not as emperor, not fully prisoner, but candidate for release under conditions set by others. The chapter ends on this moment of uncertain transition, freedom presented as option contingent on surrender rather than birthright. After re-education, Puyi was released into civilian life with no title attached to his name. Registration documents listed him as a citizen of the People's Republic of China, employed in minor governmental work. His residence was modest, with no distinction from neighboring units. There was no ceremony acknowledging his transition. He arrived quietly and began work under supervision, the same as any other employee. His assigned role involved groundskeeping in a public botanical space. Each morning, he collected tools from a storage shed, watering cans, pruning shears, sacks of soil. He moved along stone paths bordered by neatly arranged plants, checking moisture levels and trimming overgrowth. Visitors passed without recognition. Their indifference became routine. He addressed co-workers by name rather than rank. They called him Mr. Puyi, not Emperor. Interaction was minimal, practical, and direct. Domestic life settled into predictable rhythm. He remarried, the ceremony small and efficient. Attendance was limited to relatives and colleagues. No banners displayed imperial lineage. No officials delivered speeches. Marriage functioned as personal arrangement, not political outcome. Meals were simple, eaten in a quiet apartment. He learned where to buy goods, how to queue, and how to fold clothing for storage. Tasks replaced decrees. Occasionally, former identity surfaced in conversation, referenced by historians or foreign visitors seeking documentation. Puyi offered recollections when asked, brief and factual. He described coronation attire, ritual procedures, and administrative habits of the Qing court. He did not speak of authority nostalgically. Memory was recorded like data, detached from emotion. After interviews, he returned to work, tending soil with focus rather than ceremony. The transformation was gradual. Language shifted internally from titles to functions. He watered plants, swept paths, distributed seedlings. The actions carried no symbolic weight. They fostered growth without hierarchy. In early communist Beijing, this routine mirrored the state's vision of equality in labor. His presence aligned with the principle, a man defined not by birthright, but by contribution. A row of watering cans stood along the garden wall each afternoon, metal surfaces warming in sunlight. Puyi arranged them with consistency, handles aligned, spouts outward. Visitors continued to walk past, unaware of lineage. A few recognized him and hesitated, uncertain of etiquette. He responded with nods, no further expectation. The absence of ceremony became stability rather than degradation. Time progressed and health changed. His pace slowed, tasks requiring longer completion. Younger workers assumed responsibilities he once managed alone. He remained present, though less central. Aging reduced physical output but did not restore authority. He visited the garden even when not scheduled for work, observing plants he had tended for years. Their growth offered continuity independent of political history. Puyi died in 1967, cause recorded as kidney cancer. The announcement was brief, included among routine notices. Burial occurred without imperial procession. Gravesite marked with standard inscription. His story closed without drums, banners, or protocol. The emperor had become a citizen. The citizen concluded life without spectacle. The chapter ends in quiet. A former ruler sits within history as an entry rather than a monument, neither elevated nor erased. Mortality approaches without ceremony, reflecting the final dissolution of dynasty into ordinary human ending.